Now, do you want to do Brooklyn and Boston?
Yes, please.
Overarching thoughts on this series, which is just I don't even know what to make of it. Everything in my gut well, here's the first question. And I don't think we necessarily have the answer because I know he's been
Mhm.
out for a while, but Boston has sat guys. Then they were playing other teams that sat guys. How much does not having Robert Williams III impact Boston's defense?
Bruce Brown seems to think it will.
By the way, caffeine pride is for what Kevin Durant said. That was caffeine pride talking. That's my new favorite.
I didn't see that. That's fantastic.
Anytime I say something inflammatory or stupid on the pod, I'm just saying it's caffeine pride. Sorry.
That's amazing. Yeah, I didn't. I knew KD was not a fan of the comments. I did not see that specific quote. Wow, that's awesome.
Look, he needs to put more respect on Bruce Brown's name. He's shooting 54% from three over the last month. He's doing like little playmakings out of the short roll, basically,
Yeah,
and doing what he does on defense. So Bruce Brown can say whatever the fuck Bruce Brown wants.
yeah. Without Bruce Brown, they lose to the Cavs, and they're playing Miami instead of the Celtics. So he can. Bruce Brown honestly might be their third best player right now.
Oh my god. You're probably not wrong because the other candidate would be it hasn't been Seth Curry, that's for sure.
Yeah, Seth Curry's on a bum
It
ankle.
might have been Nick Claxton, which also isn't
Mm,
necessarily like great news, but I love Nick Claxton. So
yeah.
switchable bigs are my favorite.
Yeah, but it's a fair question going back to how it affects their defense. Honestly, it might not matter because their perimeter defense is so good. Like this is another one where, I know the Nets are still considered one of the title favorites out east, and there is a chance that they win this series because Kyrie and Kevin Durant are just so singularly great that with the playing game on Tuesday, it's like the Cavs cut down the Nets lead and seemed like they were going to get back into that game. And then every single time they did, Kevin Durant just pulls up for a mid-range jumper. It's like, nah, I'm going to keep you guys just enough at bay to maintain this lead. Um, Now, I mean, the Celtics do have plenty of options to throw at him, but Robert Williams would have been a key piece for both Durant and Irving, just preventing drives to the basket for Irving. Like, with all due respect to the 86-year-old Al Horford, who has, been good this year, he is definitely not going to be the same type of defensive presence. But I just think, especially like it makes me so mad how well the Derek White trade worked out for the Celtics, but between him, Smart, Tatum, Brown, like they have a number of options to throw at both of those guys. So I think they'll miss Williams in this series, but that won't be the reason they lose if they do lose.
I'm almost wondering. I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise, but it forces you to. I mean, in one look, when the Celtics play Horford without Williams, plus 6.5 points per possession, per 100 possessions on the season, still have an elite defense. I'm just wondering because of Brooklyn's setup specifically. I don't know that you necessarily would want two bigs on the court for an extensive
Yeah.
period of time. And just looking at how the Cavs went after Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving down the stretch of that playing game, Boston is built to do the same thing and do it better. You still put yourself in compromising positions, but if you're playing Tatum and Smart and Brown and then White instead of Williams and Horford, and then Horford's in the middle, like, is it a little easier to do that? Because like you just have those four perimeter guys who can fly around, or maybe it's, hey, Marcus Smart, like you can just stay on Kevin Durant, or you can just stay on Kyrie Irving, and then we'll go after the other one and try and force the ball out of their hands. And even if it's we're just going to throw everything we have at them, regardless of who it is, that lineup where you have those four perimeter players is just built to recover a lot better, I would think, than Williams, Horford in the front court. This all
Mhm.
goes without saying. I'd prefer to have Williams in the front court of that lineup than Horford just because he's so much quicker on the perimeter now. But I think the one big setup actually makes a lot of sense for Boston in this series, which is not to say I think that Williams' injury is a blessing in disguise. I just don't know that this is the matchup in which it will materially impact them as much.
Yeah. And I mean, they still have Tice, they still have Grant Williams as well. And like the Nets don't have a dominant big. Like if they're going against, if Boston is going against Giannis or is going against Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, Williams' absence would be much more concerning. But you're living with Andre Drummond taking anything that isn't a lob dunk or just an offensive putback, if it means getting the ball out of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving's hands. So yeah, I think, or I mean, Bruce Brown led the team. I just praised Bruce Brown, but led the team in that playing game with 19 shot attempts. You will live with all 19 of those if it means KD and Kyrie are not taking those. So I'm with you. I think that the four, Smart, White, Tatum, Brown, like you can basically tell them, all right, Smart and White, you take turns on Kyrie and Seth, and then Tatum and Brown, you take turns on KD, and whenever one of you guys needs a breather, you can defend Brown on the short roll. Like I think the Celtics match up defensively really well against Brooklyn, and the Nets do not match up really well defensively against Boston.
I have so many big questions for this series, but sort of you touching upon this, what is Brooklyn's most used 5-man lineup in this series, or what is Brooklyn's closing lineup in tight games for this series? We know that they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Like those are set in stone. Is Bruce Brown also set in stone at this point?
I think he has to be, just again for defense primarily, but how they use him as like a de facto big man. I think he's got to be in there. We saw a lot of Nick Claxton. I think he probably is in there as well. And then that fifth spot, it's like whichever one of Seth Curry, Patty Mills, Goran Dragic is shooting the best that night would be my guess.
I'm wondering if this is the series, and maybe not because they have Horford, where we saw it. They closed the game against the come from behind victory against the Knicks, where it was Kevin Durant and Bruce Brown in the front court. I'm wondering if we see those looks at all in this series. Do they take Robert Williams' absence as an opportunity to try and do that? I'd be curious to see. Especially, I mean, if they have Daniel Tice playing, like that might even be more of a incentive to do that, just because he's not going to be able to keep pace with that lineup. Bruce Brown already implied that he's catnip apparently to offense. When you go through the matchups though for Brooklyn on defense, and I think they've overachieved at points defensively this season. It's almost entirely because of unlucky opponent shooting. Like, and they do have a fairly good shot profile. Like more recently, like they were in the top 5 of opponent 3-point attempt rate. And so like that can be a part of scheme, but it also just might be because their interior is so inviting. And when Andre Drummond isn't on the court, essentially that ups the volume there. What is like, who is guarding who for the Nets at this point? Like who is drawing Bruce Brown's going to get somebody, right, but like who is Brooklyn's second most important perimeter defender again in this series? Because I think you can make the case that Claxton's just their most valuable defender in general.
It's got to be Kevin Durant, right? Like I assume Brown and Durant are going to just switch back and forth between Brown and Tatum throughout the series because they have no other good options unless Ben Simmons is able to make his debut at some point.
Ben Simmons is back, could be the X factor for this series.
It honestly could be. Like I'm very skeptical that he actually does play, and if he does, I can't imagine they're like, all right, you haven't played basketball in 10 months at this point, go play 35 minutes a night. So like, maybe they play him for 10, 15, 20, but like who else do they have? They don't have another good option to defend either of those guys.
No, they don't. And I was also going to say, like, Boston's half court offense, the look and feel of it sometimes is spotty, but they've been first in half court efficiency since the trade deadline. So it's just like, you're going to just run out of, and they have so many guys who can at least hit shots. Maybe they're not always making these complicated plays, but who are you putting Kyrie Irving on in this series? It's just
or Seth Curry.
Yeah.
Like, I just think Boston is going to have so many guys they can hunt. Like, I think when Seth is on the floor, they will hunt him. When Patty Mills is on the floor, they will hunt him. When Dragic is on the floor, they will hunt him. When Kyrie's on the floor, they're going to go after him. Kyrie has played well defensively in stretches, but is that going to sap some of his offensive efficiency? Like, if he's not having one of these unconscious shooting nights, is that going to turn the tide in a game or in the entire series? So it just feels like Boston has so many more areas to attack. And you bring up a good point. Like, maybe the Nets just double down and say, you know what, if we go small and we do Durant, Brown, Kyrie, Seth, and either Patty or Dragic, sure, maybe Horford mashes us on post ups, but like we'll live with that because again, it's a math problem. Like we trust that we're going to knock down enough threes that an Al Horford post up is A, just not super efficient in general, and B, is only going to be worth 2 points instead of 3.
Yeah, the math there starts to, but again, they have Kevin Durant. The other thing here is I'm going to set they've both averaged about 40 minutes since the middle of March. Mm-hmm. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I'm going to set the over under at 41 for each of them. Are you taking the over under in minutes for this series?
Over for Durant for sure. But I mean, that's, it's concerning. It's like, you hope he stays healthy, but at a certain point, I mean, he's just had to play so many minutes for this team, 37.2 on the year. Now he missed, 27 games and Kyrie has missed 53. So fresh legs potentially, but we saw some signs of Kyrie like fading down the stretch of the regular season. And Steve Nash was saying like, that's just part of him just getting back up to being a full-time player. It's like, well, that probably could have been rectified earlier this season. So, I mean, like, I don't remember, I know they released the full schedule, but like, I don't remember if they have 2 days off at one point, but they're playing almost every other day at this point.
And he's looked gassed in a couple of fourth quarters. I'm not even trolling him, but like,
yeah,
you're going from 1 to 2 day work weeks to like 4 day work weeks. Is it like that's 3 or 4 day work weeks? And you're playing this type of load, this minutes load. It's at least a factor in this. And look, it's not going up against the Knicks. It's not going up against, I mean, actually the Cavs defense is exhaustive, but like you're going up against Boston's defense, which has been the best in the league for basically the entire year.
Yeah, exactly. And like you have to go against Marcus Smart and Derek White. You get no reprieve.
Yeah. So which leads me to, I was going to jump to predictions. Who's your X factor for Brooklyn in this series?
Assuming that Ben Simmons does not play, I will say Bruce Brown.
Actually, it would be your thoughts on Ben Simmons aside. Like, it would be stupid to bring him back now, right? That puts him in just me a no-win situation. It's not the fact that he hasn't played in a year. It's the fact that this is also a new team. And you're just going to integrate him in midstream of a playoff series against what's been the second best team in the East all season and arguably the best team in the East for half the season. I just don't. And theoretically, he makes so much sense defensively because they just don't have guys who make sense defensively. But I've questioned, and most people disagree with me, I've questioned his offensive fit. He is used. I know he played in the dunker spot in Philly, but that wasn't the best version of Ben Simmons. He's used to having the ball in his hands. And while KD and Kyrie can space the floor around Ben Simmons, I doubt either of them want the ball out of their hands that much so that they can kowtow to Ben Simmons. And I would be fascinated by seeing Ben Simmons as the screener. It's not something we saw a lot in Philly. So it's not just something that he's done. And when he did do it, like the results weren't great. So there are so many questions that you need to answer. Do it in training camp. And also back injuries are fickle. Yeah. I know there's going to be the discussion. Oh, should Ben Simmons come back? There was the video of him hitting jumpers that the Nets posted. I don't know if you saw what I posted on that though. I quote tweeted it with the first time, like Sixers fans reacting to Nets fans saying this. Oh, first time Ben Simmons.
I am so happy I do not have to fawn over Ben Simmons workout videos anymore. I'll say that much. But I completely agree with you. I wrote a post over at Forbes late in March, I think, where it's just like, it just feels like they're running out of time on this season. Like I just don't see a way, for all of the reasons you mentioned, especially offensively. Like, yeah, okay, he would make sense of the Bruce Brown short roll, the short roll that he was playing, but I don't think teams defend Ben Simmons the same way that they do Bruce Brown, because Bruce Brown is at least willing to take jump shots or take floaters or take 3-pointers. And, unless Ben comes out and is more willing to do that in Brooklyn than he was in Philly, like I think Boston in particular, that has had a lot of success defending him over the years, especially in the playoffs, like, again, it just comes down to specific personnel. Like, you can put Jaylen Brown on Ben Simmons and you still have Tatum to put on Kevin Durant, or vice versa. And I don't think that's a winning matchup for Ben Simmons. Like, you're expecting nothing out of him as a scorer except in transition. I think the only hope is, his rebounding, his playmaking, and his defense can help swing a game.
Who's your X factor for Brooklyn in this series then?
Yeah, it's Bruce Brown. I mean, they're just going to need someone else. Like Seth Curry's been dealing with this ankle injury. He's just not himself. Maybe they can get these multiple shooting lineups going, and maybe that can, play the Celtics into, or like the Nets can play any of the Celtics bigs off the floor. But even if they can, put out Peyton Pritchard or put out Aaron Nesmith, and I still think the Celtics have a better 5-man group than the Nets do. So they need a lot out of Bruce Brown on both ends of the floor to have a chance of pulling this upset.
He's my X factor as well. And there's also just the notion of, they're going to put him in actions on offense, so it'll be a little bit different. But when he's not directly involved in the action, I would hazard that Boston is just basically not going to guard him. Like I know he can cut, but they're not going to read into his 3-point percent. They're going to be, hey, make these. And if we're going to die by Bruce Brown 3-pointers, fine. I'm tempted to go Claxton just because of, I think he'll end up being the most played big for them in this series, unless they tilt really towards small ball. And we also saw how he can help in a game like Cleveland's, where if the Celtics try to cater towards their hyper versatile lineups. I even thought about because of Seth Curry's injury, and just if they decide to lean into the offense, I think Patty Mills could become the X factor there. But it's Bruce Brown, just because of the workload he's going to have to shoulder defensively.
Yeah, totally agree.